Good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa O'Connor. I'm with Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and Neil Gobby and I pulled this presentation together, but it's the representation of work from multiple agencies and many people on the river. So this is not just myself and Neil project here. So just to give you a start with this, the first project we looked at is the Fish Community Index Netting Survey, and it's a periodic survey that we've conducted on the river since 1975. It's not been consistent in the number of years between that we've been able to do, but we're hoping to move towards a more consistent spacing for this survey. So it's a survey that covers the entire river from the upper part of the river right down through Potawatomi Bay. We're using 1,000-foot gill nets, 10 panels. Mesh sizes range from 1.5 to 6 inches. The time frame for the survey is set in August of each of the years, and the first one was done in 1975. The 2022 survey was the 10th survey we've done for this project, and it's the second time we've been able to combine both the creel survey and the Fish Community Index Netting Survey at the same year. So in 2022, we were able to set 44 nets in both Michigan and Ontario waters. It's a huge effort. We have 8 different agencies that were involved, multiple crews, and it took us almost a month to complete the survey. We handled a little over 3,400 fish, 35 different species, and 2 new species for this survey, not for the river, were lake chub and silver lamprey this time. And we've aged a little over 2,100 specimens. So it's a huge amount of work, and it's a big effort for multiple agencies. Overall, what we have, the highest number of fish by CPUE is right here. It's yellow perch. It's a huge part of the fish community, followed by white sucker, cisco, smallmouth bass, and then into multiple other species. So the river itself is very diverse. There's a lot of species, and there's species that are both of interest from a recreational harvest point of view and from just a native fish community. So at the same time that we were able to conduct the Fish Community Index Netting Survey, we were also able to do the creel survey again, as I mentioned. This is only done for the open water fish counts. So they were done both on the ground by creel clerks in both Michigan and Ontario waters. And at the same time, we also did fishing pressure counts by aerial surveys, and those were done 3 to 4 flights per week. So it's a huge effort over a long range of time. Overall, we conducted just over 1,100 angler interviews in person, and we were able to collect biological sample data from a subsample of those species. The river is divided into 6 sections for this, so we covered from the upper river right down to Potawatomi Bay. So again, the same area that we use for our Fish Community Netting Survey. So overall, just looking at some of the trends for recreational harvest in the St. Mary's River, it's fairly stable with the exception of 2017 where it was lower, but the fishing pressure is actually fairly high for the river. We're looking at almost 450,000 angler hours for the open water season, so it's a big fishery. And when we compare that to the other waters for the Great Lakes, in particular for Lake Huron, we are at about 64% of all the fishing effort for the open waters of Lake Huron. The fishing effort is in the St. Mary's River. So it's a big recreational fishery. It brings in multiple fishermen and obviously a lot of money to the region as well. So it's a very important community. So what we wanted to look at is how do these surveys work together, because it's our first opportunities to really look at both the targeted fishing for the sport fishery community and for our native fish at the same time. And then we have that supplemental with the river-wide creel survey. So the next slides are going to be all set up in the same way. On the upper left side, we're going to have the Fish Community Index Netting Survey, and the data is from 1975 to our survey in 2022. And then on the right-hand side, we're going to have the harvest and harvest rate data based on the creel survey. There was an initial creel survey in 1938, and then the remainders are from 87 and beyond. So looking at our walleye, our catch per unit effort area has been pretty variable over the years, but it's remained overall is fairly stable. And we're also seeing that reflected in the catch. Now we do have a peak in about 2009-10 here, and then we see that reflected again in the actual harvest rate. It was lower in 2017 and a little bit of a bump in 2022. Looking at the yellow perch, again, as I mentioned, that is our highest CPV for the river, and that's been pretty stable for all of the years that we've had the netting survey. We also see that reflected in the harvest. The other thing to note is the y-axis is different on each of the panels. So trend-wise, walleye are fairly stable, and they are a very stable part of the recreational harvest. But when you look at the number of fish that we're taking out, it's a little over 50,000. So even though it looks like it's relatively flat, it's a huge number of fish that we're removing from the sport fishery each year in the river. So it's remained stable, but it's a big fishery for the river. Northern pike, again, we had peaks in the early, late 70s, early 80s down to the 1999, 1995 area here. It's been fairly flat in the last 20 years, and that's also reflected in our catch rates that we're seeing in the river. So we did have peaks late 80s, early 90s, and then that has been well, not necessarily a downturn, it has been fairly stable for the river. Smallmouth bass is an interesting one. It's been fairly variable in our catch rates, relatively stable, but it's a consistent species for us. What we're seeing though in the harvest rate, while it's been stable for the last 20 years, we did see this really big jump in 2023. It's almost 3 times what we've seen in the past for harvest rates. So that's something we are going to keep an eye on. We know the bass fishery is much more popular, and we're seeing that reflected in the harvest rates in the river. For Cisco, one of the big things to note, of course, we have had Cisco depressed in the lakes since the 70s and 80s. So we're seeing that also in the river. The catch rates for the fish community effort has been lower. It's a little bit of a bump for 2023. Our harvest rates are pretty variable. In the past, they were quite high in the river. But one of the biggest changes has been actually management changes. So in 2008, the Ontario harvest rates, the regulations changed from an unlimited harvest to either 25 or 12, depending on your fishing license. And then in 2020, that was also changed in Michigan from 12 Cisco to a 10 combined catch from lake whitefish, Cisco, and round whitefish. So that's also being driven by regulation changes, what we're seeing for the harvest rates coming out of the river as well. One of the newer fisheries that we have in the river is Atlantic salmon. We first saw these start to recruit into the survey in 2013, and we're seeing that reflected in the harvest rates in the river as well. So it's not a big fishery, but it's a new fishery for the river, so it's also something we're keeping on the radar here. So in addition to looking at the recreational harvest, we also use the fish community survey for our native species as well. And as Justin mentioned this morning, one of the big ones is lake sturgeon. We had a historic high in 1975, and then they pretty much dropped right out of the survey. We would catch 1, maybe 2, so it was very, very low catch per unit effort. But starting in the 2010 or 2009 survey, we started to see an increase, and that rose again with the 2013, 2017, and 2022 surveys. So we are starting to see an improvement in lake sturgeon. And that's actually led to some new projects for us. One of the big one is a new acoustic telemetry study in the river. We've now got 85 lake sturgeon tagged. We have a mix of juveniles and adults. So this is a new project for us. We're hoping, right now it's a 5-year project. We expect it will probably run closer to 10 though. We're looking at home range for sturgeon, where they're overwintering, population mixing, and abundance, and we're hoping to use the close kin genetic studies to look at how we can actually parse out these populations. Now, by using this acoustic telemetry array, we're also adding another study. We've added walleye tagging in the Bar River, which is one of our last native spawning populations of walleye in the St. Mary's River. And in 2024, we're actually going to be adding in white sucker and red horse sucker tags as well. So we're hoping to be able to expand on this array for other multiple species and looking at some of our native species as well. One of the other things that the Fish Community Survey also does for us is looking at some of our invasive species. In the 2017 survey was the first time we picked up ruff. We picked those up in the Upper River survey. We did find them again in 22, but we also found that they've expanded into Lake George area. So this is new for the river. And based on the work that we did with the FCIN, we've expanded that as well with the AIS surveys throughout the river. So in 2023, we actually picked up additional rough in Lake George, and that effort was expanded again in the fall. We are finding more sites with rough, so that will be an expansion for the 2024 season. So it is something we're keeping an eye on, but we're also hoping that this long-term data set will be able to show us how the fish community changes as we're getting a new invasive species into the river. So just in summary, the fish community netting survey, it's a huge survey for us, but it's also one of the big long-term data surveys that we have for the river. It's showing us that the St. Mary's River is a very diverse community. Since 1975, we've actually had a cumulative total of 49 different species. So it's fairly stable, but it supports a lot of fish. It's also showing us positive things, an increase in lake sturgeon for the river. By convening to be able to combine this with the creel survey, we're actually being able to look at the harvest rates in the river at the same time. So we know it was depressed in 2017, but it has rebounded in the 2023 year. So the creel survey is also showing us that we have a very diverse fish community that's being harvested at the same time. And the river itself supports a very large fishery effort, as I said, at about 64% of the open water Michigan Lake Huron fishery. So just to kind of reiterate, the St. Mary's River, it's a huge river. It's got multiple diverse habitats. It's supporting a very large, diverse fish community. It's also supporting a world-class fishery opportunity for many recreational anglers. Right now, we're looking at some long-term stable trends in the community, but by able to continue these long-term data sets, we're going to be able to track that for a much longer period of time. The important thing that we found from doing these two surveys together is we're able to actually pair what's in the river with what we're seeing as harvest rates. So we'd like to be able to continue those two surveys at the same time, and our best bet for doing that right now is tying it with the CSMI. So stabilizing it to every 5 years instead of when we've had it sometimes on a more random 3 to 7 year period. I think that adds much more value to the survey. And it's also, we're going to be able to use it to track some of the St. Mary's River vulnerabilities. We know we have invasive species in the river. We know we have movement of invasive species with the movement of rough into the Lake George and lower fish community areas. We're also looking at things like climate change. As the river warms up, how is that going to change our fish community? And that also changes the water level management plan for the river, which affects our nursery habitat, our spawning habitat, and our overwintering habitat for the species. So overall, we'd like to keep doing these two species at the same time, and because it's such a large agency effort and a lot of work and dollars by being able to tie it to the CSMI, more agencies are able to tap into existing funding for those years. So with that, as I've said, it's a huge amount of work, it's a lot of agencies, and I would just like to acknowledge everybody who's been able to participate in the survey. So with that, I'll take any questions.